You happy to be home, Burger?
I still think this is so dumb.
Well, stop standing around people not wearing their masks after practice.
I don't even know what happened. I think I know who got it, but
Well, I know exactly what happened. I know why you're sitting at home. Because you standing around after practice talking to people that aren't wearing their mask. Good morning, ma'am. How are you? Wonderful. No. It's quarantine. Half this class now is quarantine. Next quarantine. Hey, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? It's like, I don't want to be like, here's a book about Native Americans, and you'd be like,
Good morning, George Ranch. It is Friday. We made it. Almost to the break. Teachers, I see you right now. Without even seeing you, you are doing a little dance right there behind your mask. I can tell their smiles from ear to ear. You can please rise for the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now the Texas pledge. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one indivisible. You can please remain standing for this moment of silence.
it's a moment of silence. Hold on.
All righty, teachers, stand your first
Okay, what's
period to make sure students are still in dress code. Yes, we're
Well,
still in school right now. I just need to be around their neck.
doing Okay, what's
we're on the top half of their body. Mask properly on your nose and your mouth. If you're wondering what's going on with COVID and why so many people are getting sent home, that's because you are exposing yourself by not wearing your mask the proper way. If
That's
you
kind of
teachers,
awesome.
I need you to go ahead and invite them up if they're not doing that, because I want to be here. And I know a lot of other kids do too, so make sure you
That's
are
kind of
following those, and teachers just write them up and we will.
No. I mean, I would feel the same way. I would be like, yeah.
Repeatedly. Lots going on, and over the break.
Kyle Frazier,
volleyball first round playoff against
whose
Casey.
wife literally does everything. Like,
Yes,
he might have
tonight,
children.
sorry,
He ain't got no
if you're going to
children.
that to support our volleyball
Like,
team, make sure you remember it's a clear bag policy. Tickets are $5 at the door, so there's no free sale of that. They're $5 at the door. There's plenty of room in Katie. But again, it's a clear bag policy, just so you can't bring any bags in there. Also, girls basketball tonight is at Atascocita. We're home playing them. Boys basketball are away at Manville tonight, so we wish them well. I know they're going to do amazing things as well.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow we take on Bush at home. So tomorrow night at 6, I believe it is, we take on Bush in football. So come out and support. Well, you already have tickets that you're coming out because they sold out really quickly. So we'll see you at that game as well. Teachers, today is so exciting. Our PTO is providing you with a pie to take home, and our families, not just PTO, our gracious families have brought pies in there. You get to take a pie home for your family over the Thanksgiving break as a thank you for all you do for our kids. Every staff member will get a pie. We'll have those set up in the library during your lunches. Please do not pick up any for your friends, your colleagues, or any of that. So you are only picking up your pie. You cannot say, I'm getting this for so-and-so and so-and-so. That's not how it works.
If the balloon fell down and it's in my way, it is probably
if there's a problem or you have a question, you can always reach me at my number or by email, so I will make sure and clear that up for you. But again, during lunches today, you will get a nice treat, so for everything that you're doing. We love you, and remember,
All
if
right.
you can't be
Bye.
kind, at least
Yep.
be kind.
Okay, I gotta go. Love you. Bye. All right. Let's.
I think we left off on government during the war.
Burger, can you see that?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah?
Yeah.
No? Oh, wait. Burger, speak for a second.
Okay. You hear me?
No, I need you to actually say something.
I am saying stuff.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
All right, cool.
Okay. Start the slideshow. There we go. All right, now we're back. Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. So we really only got through half of it. Again, I'm going to be honest with you. This is just one of those things where we talk about things that interest me a little bit more. Obviously, like I know war fairly well. So we're going to continue on the Civil War today. You have a quiz due tonight. So looking at Confederate politics, right? So the Confederacy is the we'll say that is the name of the southern country. First, I need you to do we know what a confederacy is? Like little lowercase c confederacy. Okay, so like this would be relatively important to understand because again, just like sort of a little d democracy, like you know what democracy is, yes? Like rule by the people, right? A capital democracy would be like the actual like nation, right? So like the Democratic Republic of the Congo or whatever. Confederacy, a confederacy, again, like a lowercase c confederacy, is simply a loose union of sort of sovereign or autonomous states, right? And here, because this is one of those sort of confusing words, states means countries. Okay, because state isn't like sometimes a synonym for nation, right? That's why you might have heard it when you were a kid, like a nation state, right? If you've never heard that and I've confused you more, I apologize. Okay, but the Confederacy is basically a loose grouping of autonomous nations that maintain a significant amount of sovereignty, right? When the United States first became a country, we were a confederacy. We operated under the Articles of Confederacy for roughly a decade until we realized that that confederacy was doomed to fail because there wasn't enough national power. Obviously, if the premise or if the sort of Southern narrative is going to be that this is a war over states' rights, it would make a lot of sense to form a national government in which the states maintained a significant amount of autonomy, right? Does that make sense? All right, so our 13, I think it's 13 states that secede, 11, however many it is. They are ultimately sort of independent, but they are grouping themselves together in order to provide for sort of a common defense against the aggressive North, right? That would sort of be the narrative coming out of the South. Jefferson Davis is elected as president of the Confederacy, and ultimately he will be the only individual ever to be like punished for the Civil War, right? He's the only president of the Confederacy ever. The Confederacy created 6-year terms for president and vice president, and the Confederacy lasted for like 4.5 years. So he never had to run for re-election. The Confederacy begins to fall apart the Confederacy begins to fall apart as a result of some significant defeats, right? And really, you can look at 1863 as sort of being the turning point. So 1863 sees Chancellorsville, which is a Confederate victory, but it comes at heavy cost. Stonewall Jackson is actually shot by a term called friendly fire, which I'll be honest with you, as a Marine, I never really understood that concept because no fire is friendly. Like, I don't really care who's shooting at me. But basically what that means is that he was sort of mistakenly shot by his own troops, right? The wound itself isn't fatal. But as a result of, again, we talked about like disease and things like that, he ultimately succumbs to that as a result. And so he's taken out. Jackson is one of Lee's most seasoned and competent commanders, right? So again, when you look at the Confederacy and why the Confederacy was successful, as we talked about yesterday, the Confederacy is successful in large part because they have sort of superior commanders to the Union. Their army is better led than the Union Army. By the time we get to sort of the late spring, early summer of 1863, we have the Battle of Gettysburg, and we have Vicksburg that are both significant. Okay, Vicksburg is a siege. So Vicksburg is a city along the Mississippi River that is ultimately laid siege to. If you do you know what a siege is? You know that term? So it's a military combat strategy in which you basically surround some entity, some city, and then you wait them out. Right? Because as you surround the city, you cut off supply lines. And we talked yesterday about sort of the significance of supply lines, right? So now the Grant's siege of Vicksburg and their sort of control of the Mississippi River at that point does successfully cut the Confederacy in half, and it does successfully disrupt Confederate supply lines and the opportunity for the Confederacy to, resupply itself and maintain the basic sort of logistics, right? Like supplies that are needed in order to fight a war. So Vicksburg is sort of seen as the significant turning point in the Western campaign, right? Or what we consider sort of what I would call like the Valley campaign. Gettysburg is a decisive battle on the Eastern Front. And again, so Lee had been successful at Chancellorsville. Gettysburg is in southern Pennsylvania, right? Lee has expanded his army. He's extended his army. And as Lee invades Pennsylvania, he sort of has this belief that if they can win, if they can get a decisive victory at Gettysburg, or if they can actually get decisive victories in Union territory, period, right, that might become enough to allow the Union to be like, hey, it's one thing. Because you need to understand this in sort of terms of war, right? when you go to fight wars, it's totally awesome and okay to like go fight a war in somebody else's neighborhood, right? Because I need you to understand that there's all sorts of like collateral destruction that occurs in war. Yes, we get that, right? Like buildings burn, right? Like fields and crops burn. Like there's all sorts of like additional destruction that occurs. So if you're fighting a war and you can go take the fight to them and destroy their home as y'all kill each other, that's awesome, right? Once they come to your house and they're fighting at your house and your house is the one that's destroyed, that is significantly less cool. So Lee is hopeful in what he is doing, that by extending into Pennsylvania, taking the fight to the Union, putting the fight on Union soil, and sort of allowing that collateral damage to be damage to the Union cause, that it would be easier for him to defend the South and get the Union to concede and allow the Confederacy its autonomy. Ultimately, Gettysburg becomes sort of a Union victory. And again, like we said with a lot of these battles yesterday, there's not sort of a clear-cut winner in these individual battles, but Lee is forced into a retreat. And again, because Lee had sort of overextended himself, the retreat is not the retreat is sort of detrimental. It's the retreat, as well as the battle, puts a significant strain on Lee's army. And so ultimately, Lee and the Virginia Army will never, they don't really take the offensive again after this point, right? They're going to retreat back south. And then at that point, when they get back into sort of Virginian territory, now they're just engaged in that defensive war, which ultimately sort of becomes problematic. It's less successful. It's harder for the Confederacy to be able to be successful at that point. The Battle of Chattanooga is significant in the sense that Lincoln looks at Chattanooga. Chattanooga is in Tennessee, right? So Lincoln looks at Chattanooga, sees the success there, and ultimately finds his sort of commanding general for the Union Army in Ulysses S. Grant, right? And so Grant is going to take over the Union cause. He's going to lead the Union Army in the East. And he engages, and I used this term yesterday, in a war of attrition, right? We remember that term from yesterday. So he's basically just going to continue to attack and attack and attack, knowing that he has the advantages of manpower, of industry. I mean, he's got more bullets, he's got more clothing, he's got more people, he's got more of everything. So his idea here is to essentially attack without any pause, without giving the Confederacy a chance to recover, to retreat, to resupply, to dig in a defensive position in some other place. And so it ultimately is wildly detrimental to the Union because, again, to the Confederacy, because, again, the Confederacy was already lacking in these things, right? They were already behind in terms of manpower, in terms of supplies and things of that nature. So it's not feasible in a war of attrition for the Confederacy to win, right? They have to try to like hit and run, win little skirmishes. Like you would, as the Confederacy would need to attack or kill, 5-1 or 10-1, really in order to put a dent into the Union Army, right? So that concept of a war of attrition is basically the idea of like, we're going to line up. I'm going to kill one of yours. You're going to kill one of mine. And I can do this longer because I have more, right? Which is ultimately Grant's sort of idea, right? So what you can see here then on the map is sort of the constant skirmishes that are occurring throughout this time. So Grant is leading his people or his military into a variety of conflicts and basically continuing to attack Lee's army as he begins to retreat further and further into Virginia, right? In the final days of the Confederacy, Grant and Sherman essentially engage in what we would call today sort of total war policies, right? And the aspect of a total war policy is the concept that you're not just fighting the army now, right? In a total war, you're fighting the army, but you're also going to strategically attack and strategically fight everything that is benefiting the army, right? So in a total war concept, you would bomb, I mean, if we take it in today's terms, right? In today's terms, in a total war concept, you would bomb training facilities for the military. You would bomb civilian like manufacturing facilities if those civilian manufacturing facilities are making munitions or planes, like military planes or tanks or things like that. Sherman, during his march to the sea, Sherman basically goes scorched earth, right? He essentially burns everything in his path as he moves essentially from the Mississippi across into Atlanta, and then I think he hits Savannah on the coast before going north. But I mean, Sherman is literally burning everything in his path, and the reason that he's burning everything in his path is because anything that he left, right? Anything that he left would eventually be eventually could be reutilized by the Confederacy, right? The Fort Pillow massacre is at least important to understand in sort of the sense of some of the race relations. So obviously Confederate officers, specifically the officers, generally saw African-American troops or black troops as significantly problematic, right? They're a threat to the slave-based labor system of the South. And so at Fort Pillow, you had the surrender of about 300 Union soldiers, most of whom were black soldiers. And one of the commanding officers of the Confederate troops at the time was a guy named General Nathan Bedford Forrest, right? Anybody know that name? That's the dude that founded the KKK, right? Instead of taking prisoners of war, right, which is what the honorable thing to do is in war, in combat, right? When the opposing side lays down their arms, right, the honorable thing within warfare is you take prisoners of war, you lock them up for the remainder of the war so that they can't kill anybody else, anybody on your side. And then that's sort of the end of it. Instead of taking prisoners of war, Forrest murders them all. Just kills them. Okay. Now, obviously, there's a lot of racial undertones to that, and so you wouldn't be wrong to say that is genocide on some level, but also I need you to understand that this is sometimes a common occurrence within war anyways, because if you take prisoners of war, you have to feed them and clothe them and house them and care for them. And sometimes that's not feasible. Civil War prison camps are horrific, right? Prisoners of war, especially Union prisoners of war in Southern camps, I mean, they have all kinds of like infestations of rats or lice or things like that. It's not a pleasant experience to be taken as a POW. That being said, I mean, again, it's still the honorable thing is still to take them prisoners of war and not simply commit genocide. We already talked about Sherman and his scorched earth. The election of 1864, Lincoln's going to be reelected, right? McClellan is his challenger. McClellan was a former Union commander of the Army of the Potomac. Lincoln had him removed because McClellan was not successful. I don't want to say he was incompetent. Again, he's sort of outmatched militarily by Lee. Most of the Union officers were. McClellan and the Democrats basically run on a platform of peace, right? They're trying to end the war by diplomatic measures. Okay? And McClellan and the Democrats might have been successful if Grant and Sherman had not been successful, right? But by 1864, the Union is clearly winning the war, right? The Union is clearly advancing. The Union has been victorious. And the writing is basically on the wall by 1864 that the Confederacy is going to fold, which is a very pro-Union sentiment. And so Lincoln is reelected. One, because of those pro-Union feelings as a result of like military victories and Union pride that way. But also Lincoln is reelected really in many ways as a message to the Confederacy, right? I mean, South Carolina, the first state to secede, they secede in large part because of the election of Abraham Lincoln. They see Lincoln as being an abolitionist and, a lover of black people. That's certainly not the way they would phrase that. I'm not going to phrase it how they do. But by reelecting Lincoln, you're basically telling the Confederacy, look, dude, we're going to win. We're going to do it our way. You're going to get on board with what we want. And Lincoln's going to be your daddy that makes it happen. Okay. Sherman's march to the sea. Again, this is what I was talking about a minute ago. Look, there's who was it? General Patton. I think it was World War II. It was either Patton or MacArthur. One of the two of them said war is hell, right? That's sort of an idiom in this day and age, right? Like a cliche. But the reality is it's sort of true. Nothing about war is pleasant. And the reality is nothing about war should be pleasant. I need you to understand that. Okay? War should be terribly unpleasant. The Marine in me is actually totally okay with what Sherman does, right? And again, Sherman goes scorched earth. I mean, he burns everything in his path. He is literally killing Southerners indiscriminately, right? Like if you are a part of the Confederacy, you're going to die because you were in open rebellion to the Union. Now, it creates a lot of bad blood, obviously, between the Confederacy and the Union. And the Confederacy is talking about the Union having been tyrannical and the national government having been tyrannical. And here you get this general, right, this crazy general coming through and just indiscriminately killing people, right? I mean, just incredible violence. Okay? But at the same time, Sherman is doing it because y'all started, right? The Confederacy started it. He's simply going to finish it. Okay? So this is sort of the map here of Sherman's campaign, right? He goes from Nashville down into northern Georgia, burns Atlanta to the ground, right? And then this march to the sea, he is just torching everything in Georgia until he gets to Savannah. And then he starts back north again, because once he has done that, the last holdout is essentially Virginia and North Carolina. The rest of the South by this point is pretty much done, right? They don't have an opportunity to continue. Sherman's march to the sea, again, it's obviously wildly destructive. The photo that you're seeing here is Union troops. They're tearing up Southern rail lines, right? Literally, they're just going through and destroying everything that they can in order to try to put an end to the war quicker. Because again, the more brutal you are, the faster a war ends. Because you either realize, if you're on the opposite side of that brutality, you either realize that you have to match that brutality and just indiscriminately kill everyone, or you realize that this isn't worth it and you surrender, you quit. Okay. After Sherman has come across Georgia, again, based on the map you just saw, he begins up north into South Carolina, where obviously everything had begun at the beginning. And so he's going to go and raise the flag over Fort Sumter, send some people down there. And so you have more and more of the South falling by 1864. Once news breaks of Lincoln's reelection, many Southerners understand now that defeat is imminent, right? John Breckinridge, who's the Confederate Secretary of War, basically begins looking at and sending directives to the holdout generals, people like Robert E. Lee, who are still fighting and commanding troops, to try to find a quote unquote honorable way to surrender, to end. You need to sort of understand Southern culture a little bit as it pertains to this, and we kind of talked about it a little yesterday. But with Southern culture, things like honor and pride and manliness, and then conversely like shame and cowardice are really, really important sociological concepts within Southern culture. The South is actually where most of our military leaders come from. The South is where people are far more quick to fight. And so ultimately, now that the South is going to lose, you have to figure out a way to surrender, to admit defeat, while still maintaining some semblance of honor, right? Of Southern pride. There were some others. Jefferson Davis doesn't want to admit defeat. He basically advocates for guerrilla warfare. Which is more unorganized warfare. We'll talk about guerrilla warfare in depth next semester when we get to Vietnam. But guerrilla warfare is basically the idea of like hiding in the jungles, popping up, firing like 3 rounds, and then running away, right? Like you literally just try to kill a couple of people and then you retreat and you go hide somewhere else. Right, and then you pop back up and you kill 3 people and you go run away and you hide somewhere else. And so the idea with guerrilla warfare is you're really trying to kill the enemy before the enemy even knows you're there, right? So before the enemy can realize, like, oh, we're being attacked from over here, like redeploy troops, fire on this area, you're already gone, right? Like you killed 4 or 5 people and you're gone before they figured out where it was coming from. I mean, ultimately, there's not a lot of success at that. Appomattox is the location of what we sort of deem to be the final surrender, right? So Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, which is in Virginia. By this point, Lee had been on the run for some time. Again, Grant is pursuing relentlessly. I mean, he's basically keeping his troops like they're marching at double time the whole time, which is like, in a military standpoint, that's kind of like jogging, right? Like, instead of just walking from battle to battle, like Grant's got him jogging from battle to battle because he's that relentless in his pursuit of Lee. By the time Lee gets to Appomattox, Grant basically has him surrounded, and Lee, there's no more recourse for Lee. Like, he can't retreat anywhere else. There's nothing else that he can do, and so ultimately that's the end for Lee. And then as it's the end for Lee, that's really the end for the Confederacy as well. Looking at sort of the impacts of the war. So obviously the Union is preserved. In fact, Antonin Scalia, former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, basically said if the Civil War proved anything, it proved that secession is not legal, right? You cannot leave the United States of America, willingly or otherwise. Once you are a state, like, you're just here. Lincoln is able to preserve the Union. The Civil War, in many ways, is also the first modern war. We have like armored ships. You have significant technological advancements in terms of warfare and how we conduct war. You also find, I think I mentioned it the other day, you have like photography that's now publicizing the war more. You have faster transportation. I mean, Lincoln in the White House during the Civil War, Lincoln sets up like a command center, for lack of a better term, right? We have telegraphs, right? So there's constantly Morse code telegraphs coming into the White House, keeping Lincoln up to date on troop movements and battles and victories and defeats and all of that. But these massive sort of technological or significant technological advancements really usher into sort of the first modern war. Again, where you have troops moving throughout, little skirmishes, supply lines that can be further extended as a result of railroad and better transportation and things of that nature. You do get what we call the Civil War amendments that come out of this as well. The Civil War amendments are the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments to the Constitution of the United States. One of when we'll get to this after Thanksgiving in our last chapter, one of the requirements of readmittance into the Union during Reconstruction is the ratification of these three amendments. But the 13th Amendment outlaws slavery, right? And so slavery is done away with in the United States, in all territories, in all states. You should understand that the 13th Amendment doesn't just get rid of slavery, it gets rid of something called serfdom as well, right? Or indentured servanthood. Basically, you can't even own a person for a limited period of time. People can't sell their labor early on. So these are some of the significant outcomes of the Civil War. There is some debate as to why the North was successful. Again, like we talked about already, the Confederacy had some advantages in the sense of better commanders, sort of better trained troops, more of a fighting spirit, defensive war for them. But ultimately, the Northern advantages are probably insurmountable for the South. The simple number of people, once Grant wages that war of attrition, the South just can't stand up to that. And so that's ultimately going to be the difference. All right. So that takes us to the end of the Civil War. You have a chapter due tonight if you hadn't already done it. All right. Berger, that's all.